Get your ticket for Monerotopia in Mexico City on May 5th, 6th, and 7th, 2023. That's monerotopia.com to get for more info. Welcome to the party, pal. This is the Fountainhead Forum 48. I have Michael Rectenwald, who is long worked in academia, and we're going to talk about what we can do to save the he's been a professor at New York University, and he's also longtime professor since the 80s, I believe. So, and he's wrote a book called Springtime for Snowflakes, and we're going to talk about the state of academia and how it got here and how we can possibly fix it. How are you, Michael?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you, Chris?
Yeah, so can you tell me a little more about your career? I mean, where you've been, and just to give a brief bio before we go into these questions, to tell people why they should listen to you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I received my MA, Master's in English at Case Western Reserve University in 1997, and then a PhD from Carnegie Mellon in 2004. During all that time, I was teaching in the universities, and I basically I went into advertising after undergrad, and then went back to graduate school, and everything had changed pretty dramatically in the interim, the 9-year interim there between my BA studies and my graduate studies. And what happened was that the English departments, at least, were taken over by what's called theory, and that means neo-Marxist and post-modern theory. And so really when I came back to graduate school, that's what they were teaching. And I've soon learned that if I wanted to be a professor in English or any other humanities, I would have to know all this theory and postmodern and neo-Marxist theory, and that I would have to become conversant in many different subdisciplines like feminism and various aspects of Marxism and various aspects of postmodern theory. And so that's largely what I ended up studying. I went to Carnegie Mellon for the PhD, and the program was called Literary and Cultural Theory. They changed it to Literary and Cultural Studies in the interim that I was there, but that meant cultural studies, and that's a discipline that was founded by Marxists, and the main objective there was to uncover the capitalist ideology in the media. So that's then I finished my PhD, but I ended up writing a dissertation in the history of science, even though I was in an English department. And yeah.
And you were in the English department at two schools that are generally considered engineering or math schools. I mean, Case Western Reserve and Carnegie Mellon have reputations in those areas. They're not necessarily considered liberal arts colleges, but more places you go if you want to be an engineer, right?
Well, that's some of the things they do. I mean, these are very diversified universities now.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, Carnegie Mellon has one of the best theater programs in the country, rated that way anyway, and one of the best music. Yeah. And they have a lot of other departments. They're second or third in computer science. And actually, I worked in a robotics lab for an AI lab while I was writing my dissertation. So I have plenty of, I'm very conversant in that aspect of the school as well.
Yeah.
And AI was something I worked in since 2000.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can go back, but even, and some people might even go back, to the 1950s with Bill Buckley's book, God and Man at Yale. And I know in the 90s, there was a book called Imposters in the Temple by a guy named Martin Anderson. And Thomas Sowell also wrote a book about, called Inside American Education. How did academia end up here, and do you and how and why did it end up here? What got us to this point that it's just gone crazy, where they're
Well, I
spewing out
think
crazy ideas? And
one of the things I think you got to realize about academia is that it's a state apparatus, and so they're going to, because these universities depend so much on federal funding, including student aid, but also other federal funds. They are statist institutions. So they're going to be promoting statism. But furthermore, and statism is mostly leftism, okay? And
yeah,
secondly, they're going to be promoting, basically, they're going to be attracting rent seekers, um, people that don't want to compete in the marketplace. So these are people that'll be basically, they're going to favor leftism because they favor sort of socialist economies, because they don't want to compete in the capitalist marketplace. So this is one of the reasons people choose academia, especially in the humanities and social sciences. But third, there was a tremendous infiltration of the universities starting in the 1920s, thanks to the so-called tax-exempt foundations and their framing and funding of leftist and socialist ideology and programs and teachers organizations and so on and so forth. They funded a lot of leftist organizations. They made them leftist. In fact, these tax-exempt foundations, Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, all these endowments became funders of radical leftism. And as Edward Dow pointed out, these were institutions that were meant to create a kind of collapse between the United States and the Soviet Union. They wanted to Sovietize the United States. So this was a long institutional infiltration beginning in the 20s, then accelerated in the 1930s when the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, Adorno, Marcuse, and Adorno, Marcuse, and Horkheimer came to the U.S., immigrating from Germany. Interestingly, they fled Nazi Germany in 1933. Instead of going to the Soviet Union, which would have been their natural home because they were Marxists, they came to the United States instead. And that's a very big question. Why did they do that? Obviously, they preferred the relative freedom and affluence of the U.S. over the Soviets, who might have found something wrong with their particular brand of Marxism, and they probably would have, and would have maybe put them in a gulag. But anyway, they came here, and they fostered this neo-Marxist ideology through their teaching and through their research. Marcuse became one of the leading figures of the New Left in the 60s and 70s. And his ideas really infiltrated and had a great deal of effect on leftism in America, particularly his essay, Critique of Pure Tolerance, and his arguments against allowing anything but leftist speech to be heard anywhere. So there was a lot of infiltration. So those are some of the factors. So there's a natural proclivity of academia in the United States, since it's funded by the state, to be statist. That means leftist. And then there's a lot of rent seekers. And then there's the reproduction of the same type of people by the system itself. Once you get all these leftists infiltrating this university system, then they just reproduce more leftists and reproduce more leftists, and then they hire nothing but leftists. And I've seen this directly. You can't get a job in the humanities in the United States if you're a conservative, if your life depended on it. You can't do it.
Yeah. So, and it's obviously been, yeah, yeah. I remember first reading about Marcuse. I don't know if you read an essay, but George Walsh wrote an essay about Marcuse back in I think the late '60s for Ayn Rand's objectivist newsletter.
No, I
And
don't
then
know
he
that.
said, called him the philosopher of the news left. That's worth reading. George
Yeah.
Walsh was in Ayn Rand's circle, and it's funny because Ayn Rand seemed to call, but that was the first time I saw Marcuse's name, and it said, yeah, and this was in the '60s, so they definitely called it. So yeah, obviously that's a good component of how we got here. So now the question is, you mentioned Rensingers. Do you think this is a case of those who can do, those who can't teach, or just people who can't?
Not exactly.
Are they
They're not.
because they can't do anything else? Or I mean,
No, it's not necessarily that they're incapable. It's just that they prefer not to compete in the
yeah,
marketplace. They're anti-capitalists, so they
yeah,
don't want to compete in the market, and they likewise they gravitate towards these statist endowed institutions where you're protected from competition. That you're protected from capitalist marketplace competition. There is competition within these organizations. Now, a lot of that competition is tilted towards the beneficiaries of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or as others have called it, diversity, inclusion, and equity, DI. Uh, those beneficiaries of DI or DEI outcompete others. So you can't get a job if you're a straight white male if your life depends on it. You better be some beleaguered identity category member, like black or
yeah,
lesbian or trans or whatever.
certainly. And so yeah, so maybe a white woman can get in, or you pretty much have to check all these cards
White
now.
women have some chance. Yeah. I mean, you have to spew the right language too. You have to you have to have a leftist cred, and you got to spew the language that they want you to speak. So you have to have some sort of leftism going on, especially in the humanities and social sciences.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not as bad in some of the other areas because
Well,
I know Marx is not popular among economists, for example.
no, but they're still getting infiltrated in the hard sciences through DEI. The hiring practices are trying to promote minority groups, at least in terms of those fields like physics. And I am on an email list with a bunch of dissident professors or dissident academics, and they're complaining about this all the time, about how even the hard sciences are being infiltrated by all this DEI, and they are watering down and greatly diminishing these fields.
Yeah. Well, that certainly diagnoses the problem. Where do you think we go from here? How do we get out of this, or can we get out of this?
Well, I'm going to be very realistic about this. This was a 80-year project to get where we are on the behalf of the
Yeah,
left. So it's at least a 50-year project to reverse, and it's not begun yet. So uh,
yeah,
there'll be some hopefully backlash against all this DEI when it fails, and they start, you know, graduating engineers whose bridges fall down and doctors whose patients die in surgery and things like that because they were promoted on the wrong basis, not on their accomplishments or competence, but on the basis of their identities. Whenever this stuff starts to really, I call it death by diversity. Once we have death by diversity, and it's very clear that's happening, there'll be some backlash, and then it'll take decades to reverse all this, if it happens at all.
Yeah, the death by diversity certainly, or something like when I fly and is my airline pilot really competent or something like that? I would think in some of these cases, who might fight back against this might be insurance companies. I mean, insurance companies are going to say you're hiring people because not because they're qualified, but because they're. I mean, if the airlines have to buy insurance, and the insurance companies are going to say you can't hire pilots because of their color of their skin. You have to hire them because they're qualified. But
Yeah.
it's really hard to say what's going to happen there.
Yeah. Insurance companies are.
The,
Yeah. Insurance companies are a big. Well, they're a big buffer against a lot of these kinds of things.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah, but yeah, and you pointed out a 50-year project, but is it also possible though that we might just see a mass exodus from the colleges? I mean, obviously, other because it seems like they're having because all these people talk to the people, and all these people talk to the public, and they talk to these government public policy think tanks and all that too, and
So there's going to be a
you
collapse
know,
of. There'll be a collapse of a lot of liberal arts colleges, uh,
yeah,
except for the top, very tip top. You're going to see a lot of these colleges just collapse under the weight of no tuition and no admit, low enrollment and things like that.
yeah,
And this will just consolidate the top tier, and they'll become more competitive. Unfortunately, not based on qualifications, but on identity, largely. And you know, their reputations will start to diminish. So there's going to be a kind of collapse before there's any reversal.
yeah, and it sounds like they're already that sounds like they're already starting. Because granted, I thought this is just a rumor, but I've heard, for example, that if Peter Thiel sees
Uh-huh.
Harvard or Yale on a resume, he says no, just for that reason. Which
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah,
A lot of
which
that.
made
That's good. Yeah, yeah. Because these top tiered universities are the worst out of all. They're the worst offenders in all of these cases. We saw what happened at Stanford Law School when the Trump appointee tried to speak, and they totally not only shouted him down, but they actually threatened him and really abused the guy.
yeah,
So this is these institutions at the very top are the worst. This is where it all filtered down from in the first place. This is an elite. This is
yeah,
an elite project. All of this wokeness really comes from the elite. It always has. It's never been a grassroots movement. It's what I call the subversive elites perpetrating all of this uh, for various reasons, which are not all that easy to understand. But there are reasons why they want to subvert the social order.
yeah. Well, it seems like to me there was it could be said that the Bolshevik Revolution didn't take off around the world, and they tried to figure out why it didn't happen. So
Right.
they've tried to figure out other ways to
Affect it.
make it happen. Yeah,
Yes.
and so they've the proletariat has become white people versus or the proletariat is racial minorities, the bourgeoisie is white people, or the proletariat is women and the bourgeoisie is men, or other groups like this. It's
Yes, that's true.
uh,
They converted a lot of the Marxist uh, class analysis into identity politics. Uh,
yeah,
so the proletariat, which was the working class, is now. I mean, now you have the privileged versus the unprivileged. All of this is nonsense, of course.
yeah. But sometimes I wonder if you can turn identity politics against them. I mean, take for example Ayn Rand's novel *The Fountainhead*. What would happen if if somebody made that into a movie, and you just happen to say, okay, we'll make Howard work African American instead of white. I can imagine that would be a way to, if you wanted to smuggle Ayn Rand's message out there and they might not catch it. I wonder if they wouldn't necessarily catch that Fountainhead is still very much an individualistic story.
Yeah, that's never going to get made. Yeah, that's not going to get made.
Yeah. So obviously we need to. Do you think there's something in general about the personalities or the attitudes of people who go into academia that creates this, or not? Because
well, as I said, I mean, they don't like the capitalist marketplace. That's one thing. And also, the universities are being feminized now, so that there are fewer and fewer men in any of the fields and in administration. And it's well known that women are more prone to oppose so-called hate speech and to allow free speech. They're more prone to disallow free speech. They're more prone to protect the feelings of people over seeking the truth. So there's a lot of indications that as the universities get more feminized, they become more oppressive and authoritarian.
Yeah, definitely. That's funny. And the really interesting thing about all of this is these people, they're bullies, but they play the victim at the same time. It's funny how they've been getting away with this. We have to.
Well, they weaponize identity. They weaponize their so-called fragility as a means for authoritarian, totalitarian control. They use their so-called weaknesses, their identity category weaknesses and fragility. That's why I call them snowflake totalitarians. They use their fragility, the supposed fragility and weaknesses, as a means to shut down your speech and your rights, and to progress against you in the marketplace, in the fields that they pursue. So they're using identity as a weapon.
Yeah. One thing that could happen, and we see it with things like going back to Duke lacrosse and all these other things.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll continue to see a male exodus from the colleges?
Yes, it's continuing as we speak. There's less and less men going to school, going to college, more and more women proportionately. And likewise, you're going to see a new proletarian proletarian class of men, and you could see them saying, "We're not going to do your work." You call our masculinity toxic and so forth. We're not going to do your work, and this will be a new underclass, and this is going to be a very, very bad scenario, because if these people don't want to do the kind of work that these protected classes want them to do, then they won't have anybody to do their laundry, their garbage pickup, their electrician's work, their plumbing, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and those jobs are disproportionately, work done by men. Collecting garbage, doing, working on the power lines.
Toxic masculinity built the world.
Auto mechanics. Yeah. I mean, because so many people, and it seems like they're, most of these degree jobs are just, because we have so many people now who their job description is basically you go to work, you go to meetings, and you push papers, and that's all you do.
Yeah.
So, what I know there's that Austin University thing that's going on that they're going to try to fix, or is it?
Austin that's Austin, yeah, that's one alternative, but that's going to be a classical liberal institution. That is to say, they're promoting classical education along the lines of great books programs and things like that. That's not going to appeal to that many. I mean, that's not going to solve the crisis because, this crisis is not about going back to classical education, classical liberal studies, like reading the great books and all that, because those people will not have anywhere to go either after their graduation. What are they going to do? They're going to be competing against all of these woke graduates who are coming out of the other schools, and all their employers are largely woke as well. So they're going to have the advantage still. Then there's Hillsdale, which I'm a fellow at Hillsdale, a distinguished fellow.
Yeah.
That's another alternative, and I think it's a good one. But again, it's these islands, these small islands, are not enough to turn the tide at all.
I don't. So you don't think there's any way to fix the system as it is right now? I mean, they're unless somebody wakes up somewhere. But I don't.
It has to be a cultural siege. We'd have to seize these institutions the way they were seized by the left, and this is not going to be easy because they have a foothold in all these places. They've got the administrative foothold, they've got the faculty foothold, they've got the DEI officers, and it's going to take a tremendous long-term effort to overthrow this. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in weeks. It's not going to happen in months. It's not going to happen in years. It's not going to happen in a matter of a couple decades. It's going to be many decades after it starts. And as I said, it's not started yet.
Yeah. What do you think about the popularity of Jordan Peterson?
I mean, I think it's interesting, and he's a friend of mine. I mean, I don't take anything away from him. His popularity, I think, is largely due to his psychology, his kind of like being a psychologist for men, largely, and somebody that's countering the established leftism with advice and with analysis. I mean, he doesn't know that much about some of the things he's talking about, like postmodern theory and Marxism and so forth, but that's okay. I certainly have way more background in that than he does, but I think it's very good. It's good. It's not sufficient, though. Again, it's just not enough. We don't need a few stars. We need a whole culture, of change.
Yeah. It seems as though maybe a lot of this wasn't really something that people knew about, but I think maybe the whole coronavirus insanity exposed a lot of this, because it's now at a point where all the people are thinking, maybe I can't trust these PhDs. Do you think that's
so-called
changed
experts?
the landscape? Yeah, that all these. I mean, I remember this. There was this discussion with Stephen Hicks once where he was talking about the most educated people up till the time at the time were the Germans in the 1920s, and I'm thinking, okay, they were so educated. What did they do with that? It does make me wonder if this naturally goes into a direction of, but it's because
we have an authoritarian expert class. We have authoritarianism running through everything, and since we have a technocracy, a technocratic state where the expert class becomes an authoritarian dictatorship, That's basically what we got. We got a dictatorship of the expert class, yet we have very little credence in this class. And they double down instead of establishing their legitimacy through normal means. They simply doubled down with their dictates. They did that during COVID, and they've continued after COVID. And so this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with this dictatorial expert class of complete incompetence who have been
How much
promoted.
do you think how much do you think COVID impacted the colleges? Because I think a lot of these students were saying, "Hey, I'm paying all this money, and now you're virtualizing my classes." Has that led to a decline in people going, or not?
I don't think so. Not too much. Some of the vaccine mandates may have had some effect, but not that much. Don't forget that the woke and the COVIDians, I call them the branch COVIDians, are the same people.
Yes.
This is the same people. So I wrote an essay called something about, I forget the exact title. It's about how the woke totalitarianism just bled right into, was the precursor to and precondition for COVID totalitarianism.
Oh yeah, yeah. Although also some people in the right, unfortunately, were quoting it. Well,
Yeah, that's true.
It's
Yeah, that's true.
Including Trump.
Including Trump and
so
Ben Shapiro and other controlled opposition like that. Yeah.
I definitely think some people are controlled opposition, and unfortunately, Michael, it really. I was very dismayed by by quite a few people that I thought were libertarians that suddenly bought into this.
The whole Cato Institute, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that was that was definitely something I've been wondering about. What do you tell a young college student nowadays if they're in the thick of this, if they're at Harvard or if they're at Yale or some other place, and they've figured out a way to fight this?
Well, I have a son that I have a son that's in the university right now, and he's a pre-med student. So he gets to avoid a lot of this stuff by virtue of the fact that his classes don't deal with this. But when he has to take these required classes, we work at poking through all of this and really turning their kinds of analysis against their own interests. And so we have fun with it. I teach him how to attack their premises while doing the work that they can't refute is excellent. So this is the way I treat him, tell him to deal with this. One of the other ways we thought was to just use satire. In other words, to exaggerate all their claims and satirize them without them knowing it. But we found it better to be critical instead. So what I tell students is, avoid the humanities and social sciences as much as possible. Don't go to college unless you're going for a professional degree like medicine or law, unfortunately, or mechanical engineering or other engineering. You have to get these degrees to do those things. So, but other than that, I would say it's absolutely useless to get a degree in a humanities or social science discipline.
Yeah. Law is what's really scary here, though, because that's, I think, gotten infiltrated by a lot of this, and that's a very key industry, and it can impact so many other things. I mean,
yes, law has been destroyed by this. It's been taken over by all this wokeness, and you can see it with these law students. They're completely brainwashed, and they're completely given over to this authoritarian wokeness, this totalitarian wokeness, and they have no regard for the actual rights that we hold, for the first 10 amendments, or our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. They don't care about that stuff at all. And they
Yeah.
have no understanding of anything but like they don't believe in meritocracy. They don't believe in uh, individual rights or individualism per se. They're very much
Yeah.
dead set against all that. So they're not going to be great representatives for the individualists among us. They won't do us any good at all, and they'll be pitting their courts against us.
Yeah. Michael, do these college professors understand that if they destroy civilization, they're going to destroy the colleges too? I mean, this is like the story of the frog and the scorpion.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can't colleges can't survive without a civilized society, and yet they seem to want to destroy civilization.
Yeah, they do want to destroy civilization. They want to start over. They're Jacobins who want to start with year zero, and they want to get rid of all of the foundations of Western civilization uh, and replace it with whatever. And yeah, they have little understanding of what this means. In fact, that it will be their own undoing. And they take for granted everything that they are accorded by Western civilization, including the very notion of individual rights, which they exploit. They exploit the
Yeah.
paradox of tolerance, really, and use
Yes.
the rights that we were given as a means to exercise their own speech, and in the process to shut down the speech of others who they disagree with. So they exploit the paradox of tolerance against liberalism itself. And I mean classical liberalism here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Liberalism. It's yeah. It's I don't know where we go with this, but it seems as though we need to figure. And also, you mentioned satire. These people are completely against humor. I mean, I don't think they
Oh,
ever
yeah.
laugh at anything.
Yeah, they're completely against humor. They don't have any sense of it. They don't even understand satire. I'm afraid they've lost the idea of irony entirely. It's very, yeah, it's a tragic displacement of. So we have the most ill-educated, anti-civilizational people all running these institutions of higher education. It's really that's why
Yeah.
nobody's going to give them pay any heed to their degrees in the future.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't think we're going to solve
Yeah.
all
So
this today.
yeah, and you also, it's also infected big tech, which is just
Yes.
dismaying for me. I
I write about that in
I
Google
don't.
Archipelago, my book,
Yeah.
Google
Yeah.
Archipelago. I treat the authoritarian leftism in big tech. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that's going to be? Do you think that's going to be just as hard to fix, or do you think that could
That
that
wouldn't
could
be
go?
just as hard to fix as this. These are not as deeply rooted. But the problem
Yeah.
is they're encoding into the DNA of the technology their very ideological propensities. And so that's why we're seeing woke AI and all that. So
Yeah.
they're encoding and reproducing this ideology through technology, through digital means. And likewise, this is replicating the ideology and, uh, uh, you know, duplicating it and ramifying it in the process. So it's not as long as a process of undermining that. As long as we can do it before AI becomes fully operational in a sense of governing our behavior. If we have woke AI governing our behavior, we're in hell.
Well, to a certain extent, I think we already do. With I think a lot of the censorship on line is done by
True.
bots. I mean,
Right.
really, really the first attempt to do that with AI was sort of AI with with some of these anti-spam programs, because there's so much which wasn't and yeah, I don't see how AI, it seems like it's definitely got to be used for anything nefarious. I don't
Yeah.
see how they're going to use it for anything positive. And
Yes.
everybody just lines up to get on this Chat GPT, and I've heard people said you have no idea where this is going to go or what their plans are
I
after.
refuse to participate in it. I worked in AI, as I said, from
Yeah,
2000 to 2006 in an
yeah,
AI lab, and I want nothing to do with it.
yeah. I mean, I think there are things where it probably could do some good, but I'm very wary of it, just because AI just there's a lot of things it just doesn't get. That
Also, what it does is it automates the
Yeah,
dictatorial, totalitarian measures that our elite would like to govern us by.
yeah, and it probably makes it easier for them to not feel, and AI doesn't have a conscience, so I don't know if there's any there's no humanity involved. I mean, yeah.
Right.
And there's also, I've noticed, there's a Cory Doctorow is, and nowadays you can just kind of say, well, we're not discriminating, it's just the algorithm.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
That's all. Yeah, that's been something I've noticed for a long time. It's always, well, it's not my fault, it's the computer's fault. And like, well, who told the computer what to do? It's
Exactly. This
yeah,
is all deeply programmed into these bots. This authoritarian leftism is deeply enmeshed and
yeah,
deeply, it runs through the neural networks of the digital sphere, of the digital world. So
yeah. Yeah, there is one exception to all this, and of course that is cryptocurrency.
yeah.
Uh, and I've often said I think that's where all the good guys went. Because it seems like and maybe that was part of the problem. All the good people abandoned Google and Facebook, and now they go work in crypto because that's the only place where they're. And you got any opinions on how you think crypto might save us or not save us?
Uh, well, unfortunately, many of these cryptos are not a currency;
Yeah,
they're a store of value,
yeah,
and like other value, they depend upon people valuing it.
yeah,
So it's based on the subjective predilections of the buyer. So, I mean, I've read everything from Gary North's argument that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme to
yeah,
Salfordin's book on
yeah.
crypto. And,
The
I'm not
Bitcoin
sure where I
standard.
come down on it. I'm not sure where I come down on it.
I realize that Bitcoin is just a response to the failure of. Really, it seems like it's a response to the fact that we have completely failed at convincing most of the world that capitalism is a good thing. It,
That's a good point.
it's
That's a
it's
good point.
really it's really I said we can't convince them that capitalism is a good thing. We can't convince them that a gold standard is a good thing. So we have to figure out some way. In a way, it's kind of like how critical theory grew out of the failure of Marxism.
Yeah.
Uh, it's because I don't know anybody in the crypto or Bitcoin communities that are opposed to a gold standard. They just realize that, and I've said this, we can't have a gold standard and have a democracy. Yeah. So anything else you got to say for now? I mean, you might want to mention all the books you've written, Google Archipelago.
Yeah. So starting with, I've had 5 books since my exodus from academia. Springtime for Snowflakes, which is an academic memoir, goes into my history and
Yeah,
how I got indoctrinated and how I got out.
yeah,
And then Google Archipelago, it treats the same ideology as it's penetrated big tech, including all of its programs and everything else. Then there's Beyond Woke, which is another book that deals with all of the elements of wokeness in business and everything, woke capitalism, all that. And then I wrote a novel called Thought Criminal. I wrote that during the COVID crisis, and I won't say more about that. And then the latest book is The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty: Unraveling the Global Agenda.
Yeah.
All of them are available on Amazon, but you can also get them directly from me at my website, michaelrectenwald.com.
Yeah, that's the scariest thing about COVID is it was really the first time the entire world went crazy.
Yeah.
We've had countries go crazy, and there really wasn't a safe place to go. But it seems like maybe we beat this back, but it naturally makes me wonder what they're going to try next. So,
of course.
Well, yeah. So please like, subscribe, and get me on all the channels. Don't forget about the Monerotopia conference coming up in in Mexico City on May 5th, 6th, and 7th, and also go buy my novel Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker, and we are out. Thank you, Michael. Have a good day.